This extract is taken from Let's Save the Children. It is on record that slavery was abolished in the British colonies on August 1st, 1834. This, however, is very difficult to accept, and history books which fail to recognize the apprenticeship period as an extension of the slave system must be challenged. The only redeeming feature of the apprenticeship system was that it held out some hope to an end to slavery. However, because of ill will created by the 1834 Emancipation Act, few slaves would have had any confidence in believing that they would have been granted their freedom in 1838 or 1848 for that matter. Moreover, there were no incentives for the slaves to want to stay on the plantations, so in anticipation of the ex-slaves leaving the plantations, planters turned to immigration well before 1838. With the help of the British government, a number of immigrant laborers were served from the smaller overpopulated Caribbean islands with an abundance of slave labor. With the legal abolishment of slavery in 1838, laborers brought into the British Caribbean were given the status of indentured immigrants to labor under contract for a fixed period of time. The plantocracy hoped that at the end of the indentured period, the immigrants would settle in their respective colonies to which they were indentured. It was also hoped that they would raise families and provide an ongoing source of labor for the plantations. From the beginning, planters saw the indentured Indian laborer as competition for the ex-slave laborers and to keep wages down. Ex-slaves were paid less than indentured laborers were. If the ex-slave demanded the same pay as the indentured laborers, they were not entertained. They could not strike. There were no trade unions. In fact, places like Barbados did not have their first trade union until 1941. The British government was committed to helping the planters in Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, and Trinidad. In addition to other action taken, it gave a loan of £500,000 to these colonies. The assistance of this loan enabled Trinidad and Guyana in particular to engage in large-scale Indian immigration. Indian immigration came to an end in 1917. By that time, 250,000 entered Guyana, 180,000 entered Trinidad, with only 40,000 entering Jamaica and hardly any entered Barbados. Indian migrants were offered land at the end of the indenture and assistance in bringing their families to the colony to which they were assigned. Slaves in the Caribbean were never given any land, certainly not in Barbados. Immigration to the Caribbean was very attractive to East Indians for the following reasons. 1. The establishment of British factory system in India had destroyed Indian domestic industries, including the spinning of cloth, and tens of thousands were thrown out of work. 2. Famine due to failing crops and high food prices. 3. The promise of land to farm for themselves. 4. The promise of higher wages in Trinidad and Guyana. In India, laborers were paid between 1 to 2 pence a day. In Trinidad, they could earn 2 shillings a day, and in Guyana, 1 shilling and 9 pence a day. 5. Criminals escaping from the police and afraid of returning to the village, as well as loafers, could go to the colonies. Immigration, and in particular Indian immigration, because it was large and continuous, affected the Caribbean in many ways. The impact was most noticeable in Guyana and Trinidad, as they received the largest number of immigrants. In places like Guyana and Trinidad, the manner of the arrival of indentured East Indian labor to replace slave labor has soured relations between Africans and East Indians to this day. In these countries, indentured labor was introduced in a manner which sent a clear message to the African slave. We, the planters, no longer need your labor. The East Indians have arrived. The African slaves were expected to provide free labor while the East Indians were paid for theirs. The Africans were billed as boring, so lazy that they did not deserve to be paid for their labor. It is a sad fact that although the Caribbean is a plural society where the races work together, they do not really mix socially. This goes for all immigrants alike: Africans, Indians, Europeans, Chinese, and Portuguese. Friction, both latent and manifest, exists among the various racial groups. Few of the various groups seem to know their own history or the history of the other group. None of them knows about, understands, is even sympathetic to the suffering of the African, or is interested in the African experiences on the slave plantations.